Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us at the ever-improving No Soundbites Allowed podcast. My name is Michael Vasquez. We thank you for joining us in this adventure of describing the politics that go on in our nation on a personal and local level as often as possible, giving you, the audience, more than just 30 seconds to understand what's going on in our nation. We look forward to joining you as we go. Just sit back, enjoy the ride. Please remember, if you like the episodes, like it, share it, let other people know, and if you can, please donate, even if it's $2, even if it's $5, because it all makes a difference. We thank you, and here we go. Hello, everybody, and thank you for joining me. That's right. This is Michael Voss, the Dragon of the Southern Tier, your host here at the No Soundbites Allowed podcast. And I'm happy to be back with you. It's been a couple of days, a little while, because I know the 2018 elections, the midterms they were wrecking me. It was quite some time. As I've mentioned before, I think on a podcast, you may have seen it or you may have heard about it. I'm not sure if I mentioned it. I was working along with certain PACs, political action groups, not with any candidate or any candidate's campaign, but I was working with some individuals and wound up walking about 150 miles. Yeah, it was about 150 miles in about 15 days. And at the age of 50, I feel good, but it took a toll on me, that plus everything else that I was working on here on the political side. It just took up a lot of time, took a lot out of me, as every election year does. And so it's a bit stressful. So I took a little time off. As you can see, I'm growing my beard for the No Shave November. It's a lot more gray than I used to remember it being, but that's okay. I don't mind. But I want to say, for all of my fans, those who've been waiting for this and been listening, I want to just say that I thank you, each and every one of you. You guys make everything worthwhile. That's why I do this, because of you. So I did want to thank you for that, because I really do appreciate the fans that I have, the people who come out to hear me speak, the people who are, just involved at all. You guys are great. You're wonderful, and you make it all worthwhile. You really do. Now, I do want to take care of some housekeeping before we go forward. First of all, I know that on November 19th, Monday, I'm going to be speaking at the Vestal Public Library on behalf of the Americans for Restoring the Constitution, the AFRTC. They've invited me to come in and do essentially a post-mortem on the 2018 midterm elections, just to go over what happened, what were some of the results, what are the things that we can expect to see happen in 2019 and going forward, and how is that going to affect us in our lives, not just in the New York 22nd or not just the New York State, but on a national level as well. And I'm going to try and measure out or give some impression of all of these things in all of these races. And I invite everyone. It's a free event. It starts at 7 p.m. Everyone is invited to come on out and listen to me and give your thoughts, and I'll try and tape it as well for everybody who can't be there. So I did want to mention that. Another bit of housekeeping. The SUNY Broome Republicans, that is a podcast about SUNY Broome and the Republicans, anyone who happens to be a Republican or a conservative that may find themselves on a college campus, especially in New York State. We're going to have our episodes starting back up with that now that the election's done, and that'll be tomorrow. And also, I should mention that tomorrow, September 17th, at 12 o'clock, I'll be doing my normal Facebook Live event, and that'll be available for everyone. So please, if you can come onto Facebook, join in. You're more than welcome to speak with me, to go over some topics and give me your questions and tell me what you think about everything. Because you are what matters in the politics, quite honestly. Not everyone will mention it, but that is the reality. You guys are what's important. Your votes are what are important. But even though I am going to be speaking on Monday about the midterm elections and the post-mortem there, I did want to share some thoughts I had about this. Now, you may have caught just before the election, I was talking about how the midterm elections were reminding me, the way they were presented, the way that they were being spoken about, made me think a lot about what I thought of basically of Disney, Star Wars Disney. And that's a little interesting. I mean, a lot of people don't think of that. But it reminded me a lot of how Episode 8 was promoted and put out there for the public in general. But I also think that there's another thing that this kind of all reminds me of, and that's the midterm elections, reminding me of Goblin Slayer. For the people who don't know, I'm a very, very big fan of anime. I love anime. I don't really watch regular TV. I watch Game of Thrones. I watch C-SPAN and the news. But overall, what I watch is anime. And I'm a huge, massive fan of that. And I've been watching the anime Goblin Slayer because I think it's great. I think it's a great episode. And there's a lot of people out there, especially SJWs, social justice warriors, that probably would tell you that I'm insane or it's an evil show, and I disagree with that completely. All of it based on the first episode. But I was reflecting on that first episode of Goblin Slayer, and that's when I came to an understanding. I just realized something about the 2018 election. The 2018 election is essentially that first episode of Goblin Slayer. If you've seen it, you'll see the connection. Well, maybe you won't. But I plan to explain what I mean by when I say that the 2018 midterm elections were essentially Goblin Slayer. And it's been a little while since I've done this, so I wrote out some of this, so that's why I'm reading it right now. That's why the glasses are back on. And I know the glare may block my eyes. But essentially, what we're talking about here is the TV show the anime show Goblin Slayer. Now, it's a very dark anime. This is an anime, and fans out there, I'm sure, well, at least that subset of fans, the social justice warriors, they lost their minds over this first episode. Because essentially, it's a group of, what happens in it is essentially that a group of overconfident and underprepared and underpowered adventurers, and when I'm talking about adventurers, think about Dungeons and Dragons, D&D, essentially that kind of group, took on a cave that was filled with goblins. Again, another reference back to Dungeons and Dragons and D&D. And to say that this went poorly is to really, you're really misunderstanding what the word FUBAR means. And if you don't know what FUBAR stands for, look it up. That's what happened in that episode. I think that's the best way to say it. And you can just ask anyone in the social justice warrior mindset about this anime, and you'll see it. It's all over Facebook. People have been screaming about this show, and they just can't stand it. And that's just on the first episode. They never actually saw it again, and so they don't really understand what it was really talking about. And now, how does this connect to the 2018 midterm elections? Well, the 2018 midterm elections were dark elections. Like in the anime, and the Republicans, who are basically the adventurers in this case, generally went into the races and they were sure of themselves. They knew they were going to win. And they went in there and they didn't have any idea of what kind of response they were going to get in these elections. They didn't have any kind of support that they needed for this. They just basically fell into a trap. And that's kind of sad when you think about it. You know, I'll give you an example of the New York 22nd race, one of the top races in all of the midterms throughout the nation. It's on the top 10, I think maybe top 5 list of all races that were watched, was largely an example of what we saw throughout most of the nation. And this is a close race. It's still not done. It's still being worked out, but essentially it's about a 50-50 race, just about. And the Democrat is pulling ahead about by 3,000 votes at the last count, 3,100. But what everyone missed was how many of the out-of-town students who were mobilized by the 2002 change in election law to make it easier for people to vote in any particular state, that change in the election law would allow these students to come out and vote in any district in a state. And they're voting in districts that they don't know anything about any of the candidates. They don't know anything about any of the issues that are going on. They have no idea how this is going to affect anyone long term, and they don't care. They don't live there. They're going to leave. They're going to go back to their home district or to another state after they get their degree. But they're out in force in 2018 to really make a point. And they did. I got to tell you, they did, because the result was, it wasn't quite a slaughter, but there was no blue tidal wave either. Thank goodness for the state Senate. The congressional, the National Senate. But it was a hard loss all the same. And it was an increase, there was an increase in voters by about 27%. 16% were students. These are early numbers and they're not final, but we saw an increase versus 2014 of about 27%. About 16% of those individuals were students actually coming out and voting. No one's seen that kind of growth, that kind of participation by students in New York State and across much of the country. We just didn't see them. They don't come out to vote, and they were out in force. And they were voting down the line Democrat. And actually, they didn't actually vote down the line Democrat. They were targeted towards certain specific races. We know this because of the undervotes. An undervote being when someone votes for, if there's a race on, say, the governor's race, you don't vote for that, but you do vote for the state Senate or or senator, United States federal senator, or you're voting for your local sheriff, but you didn't vote for Congress or representative. You didn't vote for governor. Well, that would be, since you could vote for that and you didn't, that's considered an undervote. You didn't vote in every race that you could. So we saw a lot of these students, that 16%, where we saw that they were out there and they were undervoting. They had targeted races, the governor's race, the New York 22nd race, the congressional race, the Senate race. They didn't really pay attention to the state senator race. They didn't pay attention to the state assembly race because they weren't needed for those races. They were focused, they were targeted, and they were out in force. And no one expected that. Really, none of the pundits noticed this. No one in the election campaigns, the Republican Party didn't see it. Neither did their candidates. And so they wound up being, in many ways, ill-equipped, and they didn't have any support for what they were facing. And then came in some of the extra players into this scenario, much like in the game. The extra force, where you would have seen it like the Hobgoblin in Goblin Slayer first episode. Well, we're talking about the Libertarian Party, especially in New York State, where we had the growth of the third party, another group that no one really was paying attention to for a long time, but suddenly they came out in force, and they made a very big place for themselves. The Libertarian Party finally became recognized by New York State because they were out there trying to gather forces, trying to get people's attention, and they did. And it was something that the Republicans were not looking for, and they were not ready for this. And it doesn't help them at all. It actually helps the Democratic Party massively, because those are votes that are getting taken away from Republicans going to Democrats. Mind you, that's fine. People have a right to have any belief they want, but the Republican Party was not prepared for that. They were not prepared for any real attention going to someone else besides themselves. And they didn't expect that the Democrats would be able to, separate of the governor's race, really taking away attention. But we've seen that. So they just, as a result, Republicans were getting their butts kicked, left and right. And thus we have the result being pretty much what we saw in the game, in the anime. And that is that Democrats swarmed They stomped on the Republicans in many races, and they're arming themselves right now with gun control and red flag legislation that they were preparing to on a national level as well as New York State level. We're seeing that they're planning for investigations and impeachment. They're threatening President Trump and Supreme Court Justice Kavanaugh and many others, looking to just push through their agenda and to set up for 2020. And they're doing this with a banner that they're holding in front of themselves for, free education and guaranteed jobs and living wages and single-payer health care. And all of that's just barely hiding the fact that they're holding on to daggers for revenge, the revenge being that they didn't have power since 2016, the fact that they lost to President Trump. They're angry. They won, and they're angry, and they want to take it out on everyone. And so, the 2018 midterms were pretty much a slaughter, except for the fact that we had the political real-life Goblin Slayer that came out, and that would be the Senate and the wins that we had, that Republicans had in the Senate, that offset part of this growing problem, this swarm that was coming at us, that, they're not goblins, they're Democrats, but still a swarm coming forward. And that's the real hero of the story, that the Senate was able to save us. Now, you may say to yourself, well, gee, Mike, that's a very interesting way of looking at that. And by the way, I should mention, all of that artwork is not mine. It looked like it was free use on the internet, so that's why I used it. From the show Goblin Slayer and or from individuals' art. I claim no rights to that. But it kind of wound up being just a slaughter. Sad and painful and unexpected. But there are lessons to be taken from that, and there are things to talk about that. So without further ado, what I'm going to do right now is I'm going to go and we're going to take a quick break, and then we'll come right back and we'll talk a little bit more about this. And I hope everyone's enjoying it. But yeah, it's a kind of different thing. And if you've seen the anime, I think you see the connection I've just made. And if you haven't seen it, by the way, I need to warn people, it is dark. It is not a happy kind of anime. Don't expect that. If you're going to watch it, it's going to be dark. It will surprise a lot of people. Just be forewarned. But with that said, we'll take a quick break and then we'll come right back. Everybody, we are back. How are you? So I want to thank everybody for joining us and being here with us and making this important day work. You guys are great. I thank each and every one of you for being around and being involved, because you make all the difference. Now, and this is Michael Voss, the Dragon of the Southern Tier, your host here at the No Soundbites Allowed podcast. So I wanted to go into a little bit, well, before I do anything else, let me first make a public statement. Oops, I don't have it there. All right. I had a link previously. Many people may be familiar with an organization called 538. It's a website, 538.com. They had made a prediction just a little while ago, before the election. They had made a promise and a prediction that we were going to see just an outpouring, a huge outpouring of Democrats, that we were going to see the New York 22nd race would be about 50 to 48%, 49. They got that pretty much dead on. I have to give them credit for that. I didn't think they were going to be right. They are. And they looked like they expected about 244,000 people to come out and vote. I did not expect that. No one really saw that in the region, and I publicly said that they were out of their minds, and there couldn't possibly be more than 186,000 people come out and vote, because the numbers they were speaking about were record-breaking, just huge amounts of recent history, just record numbers of people to come out and vote. And in fact, they were right. Well, almost. About 237,000 people came out to vote. They expected 244,000. I expected 186. They were right. I was wrong. And I'm willing to stand up and say, I got it wrong. They got it right. I got it wrong. So I'm willing to say that, and I'll say it publicly, because they deserve it. They got the right answer. So with that being said, let's also take a look at what else is going on. So I had mentioned in the last segment that we were talking about Maxine Waters, okay, and that she wanted to get her revenge. And boy, does she. Or actually, I didn't. That's not the right segue into that. Actually, the segue I meant to make was that, as we noticed, I was talking about Goblin Slayer and how we saw the revenge and of the goblins as an allegory, as an example, using that example, that TV show, that anime, as an example of what we saw here politically. And that made me think of Maxine Waters, that she's out to get revenge, as she has said herself. And that's where this leads in. That Maxine Waters, she's out to get revenge. And even in the Boston Herald, that brings up a lot of questions. Stephen Moore, who has spoken with her, they were on Bill Maher's program talking together. He noted that Maxine is just not a good choice for the House Financial Committee. And yet she's the chairman now. She's going to be the chairman because Democrats won. And this is really dangerous, because she's out to, I believe her quote was that she wants to do to the financial industry what they did to us being, I guess, black people or Democrats. And she wants her revenge. What revenge does she want? She wants revenge for not being in power since 2016. She wants revenge on the apparent, essentially 2009, the fact that we were in a recession, and so many black people and so many women and so many people across America, you would think, but she's not talking about them. She's talking about black people. She's talking about Hispanics. She's talking about women lost their homes due to the recession because of the subprime recession and the fact that the subprime rates were being taken advantage of since 1991. What she kind of leaves out in this whole message of revenge is that the Democrats created the problem in the first place. And the people she's trying to get revenge against are actually the people she empowered, which would be the financial industry. And when I say that, I mean the Democrats, if you look back to 1991, it was in fact the Democrats who changed the laws that allowed banks and actually enticed and enhanced the banks to go out and make bad loans, bad mortgages to minorities, knowing that there's a 30-year, 20, 30-year time gap before the big balloon payments would come in, with interest rates being no one knew where, but higher, most likely, and they were, and that these individuals who didn't have the ability, the credit worthiness, the capability financially to pay for these very high ending payments would lose their homes, but they wouldn't be in power when that would happen. And that is exactly what did happen. When the politicians who put this in, the Democrats who put this in place to increase the number of minority homeowners, said, hey, we're going to do this, and even though they can't afford it, and this is going to come back at the end and kick them in the butt, we're going to do it anyway. And no one will remember when it comes due because, well, it's 30 years later. No one remembers anything about politics. People have already are forgetting what happened in the midterms and this summer. So, and Maxine Waters is using the fact that no one remembers what happened in 1991 when the law was changed, and they said, well, banks have to, they're enticed to go out there and promote these subprime loans. She knows that no one's going to remember that in the general public, and therefore she can say, well, I'm going to get revenge on the financial industry sector, except they're not the ones at fault. And she wants to get revenge against all those evil Republicans, the evil white men out there, because they have power. Except people voted for them. People voted for the Republicans. They voted for President Trump. They voted for people in office. And if there happen to be white males or black males or anyone else or women that are in power, and there are many women who have been elected. Even Mia Love is a great example. A woman who's black and a Republican. I don't hear Maxine Waters crying about whether she's in office or not, because that's not who she's talking about. She's not talking about women. She's not talking about Hispanics or blacks. She's talking about Democrats, period. She's talking about power. And if you're not on the same side as her, well, then, she wants to get revenge on you, because right now you have more power than you had previously under President Obama, and she doesn't like that. And she's going to take that out. And that's essentially, to an extent, what the Boston Herald article is about. And I think it's rather scary, because this is very much like what I saw in Goblin Slayer. The goblins were out there with their daggers, very happy, dancing around. They were having a great time because they took advantage of the overconfidence of the Republicans, and they had the upper hand until the Goblin Slayer, which in this case, in this example, would be the Senate. So at this point, though, we have no real protection against Maxine Waters' desire for revenge other than the Senate. And thank God we have the Senate, because that's going to help us. But think about it. What are they looking to put through? What have Democrats said that they're going to be coming at us with? Well, they're going to get rid of the tax cuts, increase everyone's taxes. They promised that since March. They're going to go out there and try and do a guaranteed jobs for everyone, which you have to wonder, what job are you guaranteed? And what happens if you don't do the job? If you're guaranteed to have a job and you don't do your job, and if you don't do your job well, what happens to that guarantee? You've been guaranteed that you will always have a job. What if you don't do the job? What happens then? Do you just get paid for nothing? We have Senator Kamala Harris, who's out there talking about, well, she's going to pay people to be poor. These are her words in New Hampshire as she's out on the trail, the presidential trail for 2020, and she's trying to gain some interest. And she thinks that, well, if we take the money that went to the tax cuts and instead use that to pay people for being poor, paying them $250 a month, well, that seems to be a great idea. Isn't that wonderful? People will love it because they'll love getting a paycheck for being poor and never improving their lives. I think that's a stupid idea. But this is what the Democrats are looking to provide to us. This is what their selling point is. And I'm scared by it, quite honestly. I think it's a horrible thing. And I think it's troubling, to say the very least. But not everyone agrees with me. Oops, I think it's coming. Nope, I went to mono here for a second. I don't know why. I apologize for the sound being off. Oh, there. Did we get it back? No. Come on. And there it is. Okay. Sorry about that. Technology acting up as we're talking. And so that really concerns me. And we know that part of the agenda that the Democrats are also looking at is they want to take away our firearms, the Second Amendment. They want to have the red flag legislation go national. It's already in 7 states and looking to be in more. New York State's going to be looking at to pass that within the first or 2 weeks or 3 weeks of January under Governor Cuomo and the new New York State Senate, which is now under the control of Democrats, meaning that all of their wish list is going to come true. That's terrifying. I mean, we're looking at a scenario where taxes could possibly double if it were not for the fact that we have a Senate that is controlled by the Republican Party. That's how bad it could be. And people are wondering, gee, Mike, well, really, how bad could it be? Why should we be worried about this? Why does this even matter? Well, look at the New York State Senate as an example. Look at New York State as an example. We have a governor who is surrounded by corruption, almost universally understood by everyone in politics and even the common person to say that he's a corrupt individual. He's not just surrounded by corruption, by his best friends and everybody he knows. He is part of that corruption. And he got reelected by a landslide. Amazingly. How that happens, I don't understand. But he did. He got reelected because he's a Democrat. And he wants to go and run for 2020. Senator Kirsten Gillibrand is running for the presidency in 2020 as well for that same Democratic nomination. So we have a senator and we have a governor who are both looking to go to the left, which has now been defined by Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, who got elected in her own landslide. She has no idea about economics. She got elected in a landslide. Which is just still boggling my mind, folks. It really does. She got elected in a landslide, and Governor Cuomo got elected in essentially a landslide, and so did Kirsten Gillibrand. And these people are all going to the furthest parts of the left as they seek to get greater power, and we're watching them go into the 2020 election. What does that mean for New York State, which is now controlled in the state Senate and the state assembly? And the state assembly. It's all Democrats all day long, all of them going to the furthest part of the left under, as the Democratic National Chairman Tom Perez has mentioned, they want to go to the far left to become Democratic Socialists. That's where they're looking to go. So we're looking at, in New York State, going to Medicaid for all, which would eliminate Medicare, eliminate private health care plans, double everyone's taxes, and cut the quality of the services that we can receive in healthcare. There's a bargain. Oh, my God. And they're looking at also the red flag legislation, being able to take away due process from everyone and making everyone or any firearm owner a target of just about anyone for almost any reason, as I have gone over before, and I want to go over again. And I'll be having more speeches about that and some events where I'm going to be talking about that, because that's just insane. And we're looking at all this happening, and it's just, the format is terrifying, I believe. Because all of it comes back down to the thought that Maxine Waters and the Democratic Party and its various members, when they have control, they're looking to advance their agenda no matter what the long-term effect is. The short term is what's going to get them power, and therefore they're more than happy to do it. And everyone else be screwed. It doesn't matter, because they'll have power. And that's all they're really looking at. And that scares me. That really, really scares me. I mean, we've been seeing this for a while. You wonder, gee, how bad could it be? Just take a look. Think about this. The New York 22nd race, when that went through, and 538 was absolutely on the money with this, and they got it right more than I did. I got parts of my predictions correct, and I made them publicly, and I was wrong. They were very right, but one thing I don't think they noticed or I noticed or expected was the fact that we saw attack ads, the viciousness of this. It was insane. In 2014, besides the fact that we saw 57,000, 27% less votes. I think there were 69,000 in Broome County alone versus 57,000 in 2014. But what was important is look at the number of ads. In 2016, the New York 22nd race, as an example, was, again, one of the top 10, I think it was in the top 3 most watched races in the nation. That race in total had about $7 million in spending, almost $8 million in outside spending and total spending, outside spending in particular. That's a lot. And there was about 6-1. The attack ads were about $6 million, almost $7 million versus $1 million in support of the candidates from the outside spending. In 2018, the attack ads were $14.2 million. That's all of them, putting everybody together. The ads in support from the outside sources, the supporting money was only about $1.6 million. They only increased. In 2014, you had $1.1 million to support candidates that was spent. And in 2018, it was $1.6. They only increased by $500,000. But the amount of money on attacks doubled, more than doubled. And that's just crazy. That's insane. And if you went back even further in time, so you had 2018, 2016, 2014, there wasn't even $1 million spent in this race. This race was so unimportant in 2014. Democrats, the New York 22nd, Democrats didn't even run for it. They spent there was less than $1 million spent on the race in total. And then by 2018, we're looking at $21 million in total spending on this race, with almost all of it being spent on attacks. And most of that money coming from Democrats. That's just telling you a lot about what's going on right now. That Democrats are very angry, very mad, out there looking to just slam people. And by the way, if you're wondering where I'm getting these numbers, which aren't up to date yet, but already look like $21 million, that's coming from OpenSecrets.org. Okay? So it's an independent source. And they're seeing this increase, this track of just anger without regard for actually what's really important. And that's resulting, and it's been effective, it has been effective, because people have voted for a governor that is widely accepted as being corrupt. That we're seeing that people are voting for democratic socialism, which leads to communism, always, in every country, by candidates who don't understand economics and can't explain how to pay for any of the things that they're talking about. Forgiving student loans, guaranteed jobs, an increase in the minimum wage that has destroyed jobs and driven people out of the state, taking away due process and the Second Amendment. Where are these things good? I don't understand. It's pretty terrifying. But again, there's just so much going on. And I'm getting back into the pace of things, so maybe I'm more chaotic in explaining it. Maybe I'm not as clear, but I hope I am. But let me take another break real quick, and then we'll go into the last thing. Oops. Here it is. Thank you for joining us back here at the No Soundbites Allowed podcast with your host, Michael Voss, the Dragon of the Southern Tier. And I thank each and every one of you for being here. You guys make it all worthwhile. That's why I do this week after week for so many months and so many years, and why I've been doing political commentary for 10 years now, actually 12. Why am I here? Because of you. Because you make it worthwhile, and I thank you. And by the way, if anyone decides they want to donate $1 or $2, it will help pay all the bills and make it even more worthwhile. I always look forward to that, and I look for advertisers as well because it's expensive and difficult. But really, what I wanted to go into in the final segment here, and I thank you for listening so far, and I know I'm a little out of my normal pace. I'm not back to normal yet because I'm still a little distracted by these midterm elections. But I know some people are going to say, Mike, well, you know, Maxine Waters, she's not the worst person in the world. Maybe she doesn't know anything about economics, and she doesn't. She's a politician, but, you know, she can't do anything because we have the Senate, and that will prevent anything from happening. And essentially, that's the problem. We're going to be looking at a session of Congress, the 116th and 117th Congress. We're essentially looking at nothing happening. Nothing that's going to help the nation, nothing that's going to move things forward. And every step that they're looking to do is going to take away from any of the success we've had. We're going to see that on the state level. And the answer is going to be, well, it's all because of Republicans. See, we tried to do this, and it would have made things better, except they stopped us, and we couldn't do anything in Congress. We couldn't pass any laws. We couldn't finish any investigations because Republicans were in the way. The evil white men were in the way. Meanwhile, the fact that black people like myself or Hispanics like myself and others are also Republicans, that doesn't matter. We're all somehow all white and evil just because we have a political affiliation they don't like. And that's the problem for 2020 and going forward. We have this image, this message that's coming out in the media that's saying, well, if you're not like us, you must be evil. And that's a problem. I don't care if that's on the right or the left, anybody who gives that kind of message that if you're not like us, you're evil. That's a problem. And we should all be very concerned about that. Very concerned about it. And when we're seeing what's the result of this, and I'm speaking specifically about New York State, but we see this down in Florida. We see it in the Georgia race with Abrams. She's conceding without conceding, blaming it on somehow democracy was denied people, even though she made sure everyone had their vote counted twice. And even though she lost because she lost all the votes, well, that's not her fault. That's not the fault of Democrats. That's just the evil of Republicans somehow. That even though Democrats did not vote enough for her and she lost, even under a recount she lost, it's still the evil of white men somehow beat her. Other than she wasn't good enough of a candidate. That's just the case. And that would be true for Republicans who lose in their races as well. You weren't good enough of a candidate. You didn't have a good enough campaign. That's just the answer. And the attack ads that we saw that came out and dominated most of the races throughout the nation, the overwhelming amount of attack ads were effective, sadly, because that just means we're going to see more of them. And we saw people win because of that. Sadly. Very sadly, because politics has devolved into this 30-second soundbite, which is why I'm against it. Because these are issues we can talk about. And we should. And because what happens when we just devolve to, well, it's a 30-second ad, and I'm told that I should vote for this person, otherwise I'm evil. I'll give you a great example. We get the case of Governor Cuomo. And I mentioned him a little bit before, but I want to talk about what did Governor Cuomo, what was the first thing Governor Cuomo did once he won? And he was expected to win. And even though he's under suspicion of massive corruption, even though he's planning to give up the governorship to run for president, even though that's something he said he would never do and he promised he wouldn't do, he's looking to do it anyway. So the question comes down, what was the first thing he did? He said that he wants to go and restrict people's firearms and their Second Amendment rights with passage of the red flag legislation and even more. So he wants to abuse that power and take away people's rights. And he also, the very next thing he did is he turned around and announced a $3 billion, almost $4 billion deal with Amazon. A deal that he didn't speak to anyone about. The state Senate, the state assembly, no one knew about it. The only person who knew about it was Bill de Blasio, the mayor of New York City. And Mayor de Blasio and Andrew Cuomo made a deal with Amazon and didn't tell anyone about it. In fact, they made sure that no one could do anything about it. Not only didn't they tell anyone, they made sure no one could do anything about it so that they could have this go through because they're in charge, because they know better than everyone else. The mantra of the Democratic Party at this time. Government is smarter than you. So government should run things for you. They should micromanage your life. Government should decide for you everything. And its impact on you is meaningless because they're smarter than you. And Governor Cuomo was saying, oh, well, we're going to have all these jobs that are going to be created. And we're going to bring this in. And it's going to be fantastic. It's going to be wonderful for you. And you got to wonder about that. And Slate brought up a wonderful question, the Slate magazine. This is economic incompetence. And we see this not just with Governor Cuomo, we see this with the entire Democratic Party and their lineup. Because what we see is that they're talking about, well, in New York State as an example, there's the drone testing site, which isn't talked about much, over at Griffiths International Airport, which has spent over $250 million on this. $250 million was spent on creating this drone site and promoting it and promising to bring in over 2,000 jobs. At this moment, roughly about 20 jobs have been created. It was promised that it would bring in $70 million a year in tax revenues. It hasn't even crossed $1 million as far as all the records I could find. We know that we had the Nano Center that was promised to bring in billions. The Buffalo Billions failed. The upstate uprising New York, Rise Up New York, or New York Rises, it failed completely failed. $38 million created 53 jobs. Ridiculous, absolute failure. In fact, all of these programs created by Governor Cuomo, because he had a stranglehold of power and he was going on democratic values, looking to promote himself to gain even more power and to increase the power of his party, in every single case, it's failed. Economically, has failed and has kept New York State, and especially upstate New York, losing jobs and being further in unemployment than anywhere else in the nation, virtually, in the top, and having the mass exodus of our state. Over 1.2 million people, almost 1.5 million people have left over the last 8 years, which will cost the state 2 members of Congress. That's huge. These are huge things. These are huge problems. And how do we get here? Because people blindly said, well, I'm just going to vote Democrat, and if I don't, I'm evil. So I'm either not going to vote at all and not be involved in this because I don't want to be involved in politics, even though it's affecting your taxes, your jobs, the availability of jobs. It's destroying the state and your freedoms. Even though this is all happening, either people decided, well, I just don't want to vote because I'm not political. I don't want to be involved in politics, although politics is involved with you. Or they decided, well, I'm going to vote for the person who's most likely corrupt, who I'm pretty sure is corrupt, that has this stranglehold over our government and is making deals that he doesn't tell anyone about. And every time he does do these things, they always fail. And I'm going to vote for that guy anyway. Does that make any sense whatsoever? How does that help anyone? I don't know. It doesn't make sense to me. But this is the result. Because a commercial said, don't worry, this time it'll be different. Democratic socialism. This time it will be different. The fact that we have no idea about the economics. Seriously, look up any conversation of Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez with anybody in the news media that actually asks her a question about economics, which she has a degree in, to explain both either the economic impact of what she's proposing, or how to pay for what she's proposing. Just listen to her answers. They're absolutely asinine. I can go to a junior high school and get better answers than she can provide. And yet, these are the leaders that we're putting in place. And you have to say to yourself, what's going to happen? How bad will this get? And the answer is, well, we'll see in 2020. Because if they maintain this kind of stranglehold on power, this is Goblin Slayer. To bring it back to that. This is all the Goblin Slayer. And I'm equating the Democrats with the goblins. And the goblins are overrunning. And we haven't been paying attention. And that lack of attention to the details is coming back to haunt us. And it's going to hurt us. That's my opinion. You may disagree. But if you do, please just get in touch. Find me on Twitter, Facebook, send me an email. Or tomorrow, when I do the Facebook Live, come on. Say, Mike, I think you're completely wrong. have a different idea, please explain it to me. I'm always willing to speak with you. Let's have that discussion. Let's talk about these things because they, at the end of the day, always affect us. And you may not want to be political, but politics wants to be a part of your life. So with that said, I'm going to end the episode here. I hope it wasn't too choppy. Getting back into it, getting back into my flow with this. So bear with me. It'll take me an episode or two. But I thank everybody for being here, for listening in. And we're going to do a lot more very soon. I hope everyone's going to be well. I look forward to talking to you again soon. Thank you.